Buenas noches. Good evening. What a pleasure to be here. I had an interesting experience not too long ago. I was teaching a class in the New Testament, and I'm really passionate about the New Testament, but this class in particular was about the background of the New Testament. So we cover the intertestamental period, the period between the Old Testament and the New Testament. There's roughly 400 years that the Bible doesn't say anything, but history tells us much about what happened in between the Old Testament and the New Testament. And we talked about the Greeks and how Greek became the lingua franca, how everybody in the Greek empire were beginning to speak Greek. And then we talk about the independence of the Jews. And then we talk about how the Romans came and crushed the Jews. And I was trying to set up the New Testament to understand so many elements that sometimes we just don't understand. Who are the Pharisees? Who are the Sadducees? Who are all these Herodians and all these people that the New Testament, and I was so passionate talking about it, teaching about it, and I was like just really loving the opportunity of teaching. And then one pastor wanted to talk to me, and he said, thank you very much for all this knowledge. I really appreciate it, and I just want to talk to you. So we talked, and I wanted to hear what he had to say about this class I was so passionate about. He said, this is really good information. Okay. I really enjoy the discussion. Okay. Bring it, But I'm having a hard time connecting what you just spoke about, these cultural issues, historical issues, with real life. And at first, I was a little disappointed because I wanted that pastor to say, man, this is the best class I've ever taken. And you just opened my eyes. And I had to say, well, tell me a little more about that. He says, well, you see, this is interesting and it's good information, but how do I take that from the first century and bring it to the 21st century? And then I understood what he was saying. It's great to talk about Sadducees and Pharisees, but how do I take that from the first century to the 21st century? It seems that there's such a big distance. It seems that sometimes they were a little more primitive and we are more modern. It seems that they have some issues and we have modern issues. So how do I do that? And he said, look, I love God and I'm a disciple and I love preaching and I try to find scripture, eternal truths that I can apply to situations. But why do you teach all this background? How do I apply it? And I had to go do my homework and really pray and ask God, yes. Why is that important? It's great information, but how does it make a difference? And in wrestling with these issues, I came to the realization that as we dive deeper into the first century culture, we begin to learn that the gospel spoke to some issues that the gospel is speaking today. And we can listen to that voice and apply it to our 21st century. Let me just give you 3 examples of what I'm talking about. Talking with this pastor, I realized that oftentimes the gospel has turned into speaking to the private, spiritual aspects of the individual. But going back to the first century, you begin to see that the gospel spoke to social issues that pertain to so many aspects, from economy to politics. There were Herods and there were emperors saying, we are the king, and here is a group saying, there's only one king. His name is Jesus. And that was a threat to them. So the gospel from the beginning begins to speak into something bigger than just the spiritual intangibles of individuals. Does that make sense? So here are the 3 things that I believe that the gospel is speaking today. And I tested this later on in this class with pastors. What are some of the big issues of the 21st century? 1, globalization. You've heard that term. Globalization. We live in a global world, and even if we don't understand, we somehow understand what it means. Like, yes, things are changing. It's a little more global. Even at the seminary, it seems that we could have people from all over the world taking the same class that we're teaching. So the world is changing. The demographics are changing. Churches are realizing 20, 30, 40 years ago, everybody in this neighborhood had this profile, if you will, and the demographics are changing, and you begin to see we live in a global world. You hear different languages, and things are changing. How does the first century speak to that? Well, they actually had a similar phenomena called cosmopolitanism. You've heard that term, cosmopolitanism, and they were actually beginning to say, well, look, we are citizens beyond our community. We are citizens of the world. And it is actually during this time that we begin to see that everybody had to learn a second language, and that was Greek. In fact, our New Testament comes in Greek, even though many of the authors, perhaps their first language was Aramaic. Some of them read Hebrew, but they were forced to speak another language. Things were changing. And we could actually imagine Jesus speaking Aramaic, reading Hebrew, and perhaps speaking Greek. Enough. Perhaps with an accent. And things were changing. And you begin to see that it is in this time that God appointed this time to begin to speak. And you know why Christianity spreads? Because it's actually able to take advantage of it. Globalization was supposed to Hellenize people, to make them more Greeks. But God had a way of turning that around and saying, we're going to make them saved, redeemed, holy, and things begin to change. So God used cosmopolitanism, and Christianity emerges. God is using globalization, and we're teaching online all over the world, and things are changing, demographics are changing, but God is still speaking to this issue. Let me give you another one. I ask pastors about this one. What is a big concern that you have? We're losing our young generation. They live in, and they use this word, in a post-Christian era, where Christianity was predominant, is becoming a minority. And I said, let's go back to the first century. Because in the first century, we have a pre-Christian era where Christianity was always a minority. Always. And see, the biggest challenge is not being a minority. Christianity has no problem being a minority because it speaks truth to a generation. In fact, most of the trouble really kind of began when later on we had this official Christian religion. It became more of the official religion of the Roman Empire. But when Christianity was a minority, when it was actually challenged, and when there was persecution, something was happening. And if you look at the pre-Christian era, you may want to learn some things that could speak to our post-Christian. But let me just say one thing. We may be in a post-Christian, and that's an iffy term because it only relates to dominant Christianity going to be becoming minority Christianity. But we may live in that post-Christian, but we will never live post-Christ. And that's what the first century teaches. One more thing I think is important. As we encounter these changes in globalization, we see ethnic changes and multicultural exchanges. I'm so passionate about that. But here's another problem in the 21st century. Even though we've talked about a lot of issues, unfortunately, church continues to be the place where we have congregations has perpetrated segregation. A big issue we have is, yes, we could have service, and at times this is fantastic. Sometimes you would have an early service and some group would come early in the morning, and then the next group comes later, and then we'll rent the building to the next group because we could use them. But the reality is we're not worshiping together. And you begin to feel, why is Sunday one of the most segregated days of the week? And you begin to go back to the first century, and you discover that the first issues they had to wrestle with were like, so we have the gospel, and we have a king, but how do we work out our cultural differences? And that's where the gospel begins to thrive. And that's when they had to wrestle. In fact, you read the New Testament, you know that they did not know how to wrestle with it. They had to follow the Spirit. Because it was only in the Spirit when they realized the Spirit is falling upon all flesh, Greeks and Jews. And it is the Spirit that's leading us forward, that they realized we could overcome this. And the message of the cross is saying He has ended this separation wall to make us one. Not Jew, not Greek, no male or female, not free or slave. That Jesus brings us to be one. And I'm reminded that Jesus said, at some point the world will see that they are one, and they will know that you sent me. And isn't that an issue of the 21st century? And maybe we ought to go back to dig deep into these cultural issues. And so I concluded that class very excited, like I was in the beginning, because I could tell you that the first century and the 21st century are far from each other, but not too different. And the gospel continues to speak to these same issues, not only private, not only personal, not only spiritual, but at a global level, at a social level. And for that, I'm very grateful.